If you were sitting in a theater in 2022 for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and were wondering why you possibly heard some smattered audience applause when a particular car was quickly shown flying through the air during the title character's visit to a Nightmare Realm, New York City, well, chances are that, unlike those enthusiastic clappers, you're probably not a superfan of the film's director, Sam Raimi. If you were, you would have understood that this was no mere car, but rather the continuation of what has become a beloved filmmaker trademark. The car in question, a yellowish 1973 Oldsmobile Delta 88, has been lovingly dubbed the Classic by Raimi himself, and it, or at least a replica of it in some cases, has appeared in almost all of Raimi's films throughout his long acclaimed career. The Classic originally belonged to Raimi's parents, and it was the car that gave a filmmaking-obsessed teenage Sam Raimi numerous rides to the local theater in Royal Oak, Michigan, where he grew up and spent much of his formative years making 16mm and 8mm short films with his brothers and friends. The Classic was eventually passed down from his parents to Sam's possession. His longtime friend and frequent cinematic collaborator Bruce Campbell has even jokingly theorized that perhaps the car's back seat could be where young Sam lost his virginity. While Raimi has never confirmed nor denied this, he clearly did love the car and the memories it represented, enough to include it in his debut feature, 1981's The Evil Dead, where it was shown to belong to Campbell's Ash Williams, the car that takes him and his doomed sister and friends to the remote forest cabin where they soon meet a grisly fate. The Classic would go on to appear in both of Raimi's Evil Dead sequels, Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, as well as the eventual TV series Ash vs. the Evil Dead. But Raimi wasn't content to withhold the Classic to just that particular franchise. The car can also be seen in 1985's Crime Wave, 1990's Darkman, 1998's A Simple Plan, 2000's The Gift, 2009's Drag Me to Hell, and the aforementioned Doctor Strange sequel. Perhaps its most notable non-Evil Dead appearance, though, especially to mainstream audiences, would be Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, where it was heavily featured as Uncle Ben's car. There are even rumors that it appears under a covered wagon in Raimi's 1995 western The Quick and the Dead, and that it was temporarily disassembled and used for parts of an on-screen machine in his 2013 failed blockbuster Oz the Great and Powerful. Though in those two cases, it's hard to say whether this is true, or just the famously cheeky Raimi having some fun with his own legend. And while Spot the Classic has become a fun go-to game for Raimi fans over the years, the car does not appear only in films directed by Raimi. Because of his long friendship and early collaborations with the Coen brothers, the Classic can also be spotted in Blood Simple, Raising Arizona, Fargo, and The Big Lebowski. And in 2013, it was one of only two performers from the original Evil Dead trilogy who returned for brief cameo appearances in a new, non-Raimi-directed but Raimi-produced take on the iconic horror series. And in this case, the Classic's cameo was a true testament to how notable a part it has become of Raimi's on-screen legacy, as its quick appearance was treated not just as a fun Easter egg to fans, but rather an intriguing mystery, opening up questions about the new film's place in the franchise's larger overall continuity. The year is 2013, and Sam Raimi's Ghost House Pictures and Sony Pictures are ready to unleash a new reimagining of Raimi's 1981 classic debut onto the world, and perhaps kickstart a new iteration of one of the most beloved horror franchises with Evil Dead.
10, Welcome once again to Fairly Odd Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. And before we start, Trev, I've been reading a book. It's the Big Book of Baby Names, and I just want to make sure. I'm thinking these three names might be okay. Klaatu, Barada, and Nikto. Those are.
Boy.
What do you think about those?
You sure that? What's the title of that book again? Where'd you find it? And does the cover feel strange or?
It feels like skin.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I think. Okay, we're gonna have to have a talk. So,
yeah.
Well, actually, you know what? I'm good because we're recording this like separately. You know, we're in different countries. So I'm probably safe, right? I don't think these forces come across the airwaves, but
you're gonna die tonight.
You know how I know that that's just like the way I can tell it's just like a clever little scripted thing you came up with is when you said you were reading a book. I was like, well, there's no way this is true. This must be acting.
Well, actually, yeah, like I didn't even read my notes there. I have like words beamed into me. I record myself earlier. I have one headphone in. I'm illiterate.
Yeah, we always talk about how like you write like the notes for these episodes, but what people don't know is like when you send them to me, they're just like a bunch of like crayon scribbles that I have to like figure out. I'm like Rebecca Hall and Godzilla Kong, just reading your hieroglyphics and putting it all together. Yeah,
yeah, 100%.
That's what we call a timely reference in the podcast business. And speaking of timely, Chris, it is time for part 2 of our most timely theme of all time, the theme that is not technically factually correct, but whatever, we don't care. It's April, so for us, even though Easter wasn't in April this year, we still are celebrating Evil Easter. Look at 2 horror films, both with evil in the title.
You seemed so defeated.
I know. Well, it's like I'm actually. Whatever, I'm over it. I'm over it. But
sure.
But never over watching horror movies with evil in the title. And in fact, something I didn't even think about. I don't know if this is the case for you too. I was like, oh yeah, we picked 2 movies with evil in the title. That's great. And then watching this this weekend, going like, oh, actually, these movies have a lot more in common than I think I realized initially.
Oh yeah.
But so last time we looked at, I was about to say the great Evil Speak, more like the pretty good Evil Speak. And this time we are looking at 2013's Evil Dead. Not The Evil Dead, not 1981's The Evil Dead, but 2013's Evil Dead. Took out that article, and I don't know, you call this a remake. I know they call it a reimagining. We can talk about how, you might even argue it's just a sequel. We'll get into all that. But that's what we're looking at. The 2013 version, the 4th film in the Evil Dead franchise. And some people might even say, like, well, what do you thought? There's been another film in the franchise since then? Don't worry. We're going to get into it, why we consider this a failed franchise starter. But Chris, why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about 2013's Evil Dead?
Sure. It is directed by Fede Alvarez. This is his directorial debut. He went on to make Don't Breathe, and he's actually making the upcoming Alien Romulus that's going to come out this year.
He also made another movie that we will do eventually as well on here, The Girl in the Spiderweb.
Oh, right. We will. Yeah. He wrote this one as well with his writing partner. I'm gonna butcher his name, but it's Rodo Sayegues. Sayegues?
Sure.
Sure.
Apologies to our Uruguayan listeners.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Also, speaking of Uruguayan listeners, English is not their first language. So, oddly enough, Diablo Cody is an uncredited script doctor on this one as well. So I wanted to get that out of the way.
I always forget about. Like I reminded of it every couple of years, and it's like always like, oh yeah, Diablo Cody gets a little bit of the credit for the Evil Dead like reboot or whatever. But I always forget about that. And I know you and I are both Diablo Cody horror film stans.
For sure, from the beginning. Not just I saw Jennifer's Body in the theater, and
me too.
I really enjoyed it then. It's really nice to see it getting its due all these years later.
Isn't that great? Seeing it finally come back and get the credit it always deserved. Yeah.
Oh, it's been awesome. And then Lisa Frankenstein. I jumped to go see that in the theaters, and I thought that was awesome. I really loved Lisa Frankenstein.
Yeah, and I just caught up on that and quite enjoyed it. Yep.
Yeah. But for Evil Dead, the budget of this film is $17 million. Domestically, it made $54 million. And worldwide, Trev, it almost made $100 million. So this is actually a big hit, surprisingly enough. So, we'll get into it.
Yeah, big hit. And it was one of those like real like front-loaded hits. Like where almost all the money came from like the first weekend, as is often the case with horror. But still, that's nothing. $97.5 million on a $17 million budget. Definitely, like you said, that ain't nothing to sneeze at. That's a giant hit. So
that's great.
We'll definitely, and that's like I said, we don't only look at box office failures. Sometimes other things get in the way. So we have that to talk about later.
Mm-hmm. So Trev, this franchise, I know this franchise in general holds a special place for you. I am more of a newcomer to the franchise. In 2017, me and my buddy did a movie challenge, and what it was it forced you to watch movies that were on your shame list. So we would pick one movie from the 10s, two from the 20s, three from the 30s, yada yada, all the way up to 10 movies in the 2000s. You would pick from, and I finally got to see the original The Evil Dead. And that was the first time I watched it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but I had this feeling and this theory that, based on your age and the fact that you don't think movies were invented until Jurassic Park, are you one? And I know you wouldn't be alone in this, but was the 2013 Evil Dead actually the first Evil Dead movie you saw?
It was, yes, and I saw it in theaters. So,
yeah, that's what I figured. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. The franchise in general, though, it's such a definitive one. Hey, like it's got its own tone. It's got its own place in horror culture. Like what? It's a franchise that you laugh and scream at. You know what I mean? It's like one of those like zero consistency franchises, right? And it's like I heard Eli Roth call it a violent Three Stooges. Would you agree with
that's
that?
definitely true for Evil Dead 2. And then Army of Darkness kind of takes out some of the violence a little bit and goes even more Three Stooges.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that initial trilogy in particular is very, very... I mean, like, first of all, let me say, you're right. This is obviously a franchise that I have been obsessed with for a very long time. So let me just actually explain my history with it, and then I'll get into, like, what you were just saying about, like, my thoughts on the tone of it. Because for me, and again, I think actually this is not that uncommon either, because I've certainly met and talked to other people since then. I saw the original trilogy in reverse order. I saw Army of Darkness first in the theater, and that purely came off of that poster for Army of Darkness, the classic where it's like a Frazetta kind of looking painting where he's Ash is posing with the woman with him on the side, like very medieval looking.
Yeah,
that poster was just on the back of like every comic book in '93. So I was always like seeing that poster and being like, what's this? And then seeing some TV spots for it and just being like, this looks fun, and like convincing my parents to take me to see that movie. With obviously my parents had no idea what Evil Dead or Evil Dead 2 were either. So we all just went into that movie not knowing it was the third movie in anything. And honestly, you can watch that movie and that's fine, because it quickly kind of, catches you up to speed at the beginning, right? And it was only after seeing it and really enjoying it, and then going like back to the comic book store and being like, yeah, I saw this movie Army of Darkness. Pretty sure the clerk at the store was like, oh, did you see the other ones? I'm like, what? And be like, oh no, that's actually like a trilogy. And then finding that out, going to the video store, and the video store not having the Evil Dead, but having Evil Dead 2, and being told, well, Evil Dead 2 is the one that leads directly into the one you just watched, so renting that. And so, like, I guess the point I'm making is what's interesting about going in reverse order is I kind of was unprepared for, like, The Evil Dead, and how that is, like, the non-funny one. I mean, there's, like, a little bit of humor in it, but it is the more intense, just gore-fest horror film. But when you go in reverse order, you go from the goofiest one to Evil Dead 2, which I think is probably... I'd say probably the best horror comedy of all time. Like, when you're talking about this, like, violent Three Stooges thing, Evil Dead 2 is pretty much the pinnacle of mixing scares and gore with slapstick humor.
Right.
I just don't think it gets any better than that. And obviously, like, just the crazy camera and style inventiveness of Sam Raimi, which is true of the whole trilogy. But yeah, so going backwards, you go from like the very, very goofy Army of Darkness, the perfect marriage of horror and comedy in Evil Dead 2, and then the Evil Dead, which is just pure horror. But that all happened pretty quickly for me after seeing Army of Darkness. So, what came out in February '93? So I saw Army of Darkness in the theaters when I was 12, and then quickly rented and came across and saw the other ones. So I'd seen them all by the time I was like 13 or 14, and just fell in love with it. And ever since, I've been like a huge fan of that initial trilogy. And I think one thing, like, you mentioned, like, what this trilogy or what this series is. I think another thing that sets it apart from other horror franchises is it's one of the few horror franchises that's defined by the hero and not the villain.
Totally.
So, I mean, like, you think about, like, with Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, right? It's like the heroes come and go. There's different final girls. You might have some overlap, like Loomis sticks around for a while in the Halloween series, but like, people are coming to see Michael Myers.
Sure.
People are coming to see Jason. People are coming to see Freddy. People aren't coming to the Evil Dead movies to see the Deadites. They were always coming to see Ash. And obviously, that's why we have to mention the other, like, the big part of this franchise is Bruce Campbell and that character, and just the pure charismatic power of Bruce Campbell and how great he was as that character. A character that's kind of like even a little bit of a bland cipher through 75% of the first film, and only becomes a little bit more interesting in the last few minutes of it. But then just like the star, like, showcase that Evil Dead 2 is for him. and then Army of Darkness. I mean, creating like an archetype type character that has just never gone away. And you look at video games like Duke Nukem, which are heavily influenced by the Ash character, and just like I would say even like a lot of like modern stars like Ryan Reynolds. I feel like a lot of their persona is built on what Bruce Campbell wrought in the past.
Right. It's funny because like
love Bruce Campbell, love Ash, love the Evil Dead trilogy.
Well, that first one, right? It's like you keep saying it's your true horror movie, made on a shoestring budget, right? And Bruce Campbell is kind of just your dumb, cowardly guy in the beginning of it, but then has become basically a superhero through these movies. And he's like super confident. He's got catchphrases at this point.
Hail to the king, baby.
Ash is why you go see this. Like hell, and we'll talk about it, but there's even like the TV show that came out there for a while, Ash versus Evil Dead. So yeah, Bruce Campbell, we've talked about Bruce Campbell in the past before, how he always deserved to be a bigger star.
Yeah.
He's well known among film people, sure, but he's never really broken through, like you just said, Ryan Reynolds has, or that sort of thing. So,
well, I mean, Army of Darkness was a big part of it. So that was them. That was like the attempt to see, because that's a studio film, right? Universal took that, and they were like, okay, well, obviously people really like these Evil Dead movies. They've done really, really well on video for being these low budget films. Let's give this guy a budget. Let's give him, like more resources, and see if we can make like this into a studio thing. And it bombed bad. It was a really big disaster. And I guess this is still true today. We've talked about it before, but that's a time where, because Bruce Campbell was kind of front and center in the marketing and he was the lead, I think that like Hollywood looked at that movie bombing and was like, okay, I guess you're not ready for the big leagues, which is really too bad, because obviously it's a great performance. I think also one thing that probably plays into that is we love him, obviously. And now I think, people come around to realizing he's an interesting actor. He's definitely got his niche, but like, the Ash character, and in particularly in Army of Darkness, another thing that I love about Ash, but makes him a complicated character to lead a studio film, is he's also a doofus and an asshole.
Yeah.
He's like, and that's what's great. It's like in the original movie, again, in the Evil Dead, he's just kind of a normal guy. But in Evil Dead 2, and especially in Army of Darkness, they're like, Sam Raimi has this obsession with, first of all, beating up Bruce Campbell all the time, but also making him play like the biggest moron in the world. So Ash is a guy, they always say, he's a guy you want on your side when the Deadites show up, but otherwise you probably don't want to be around him, because he is a braggart, he's a moron. He's a huge dolt, and I love that about him, and that's like I think that's like a brave choice and makes those movies interesting. And even if you read into, there's like scenes that they wanted to do in Army of Darkness that the studio wouldn't let them do, and two of them I always come to mind, and I really regret that they're not in the movie, because to me it was like this would like raise the movie to like a whole other level. When the Deadites come to the castle after, like, they have that whole montage where Ash is training all the soldiers to like get ready for their big battle with the Deadites. When the Deadites first show up, they wanted to then cut to everyone going, "Where's Ash?" And they find him hiding in a closet, which they cut out. And then the other thing they cut out, and this one really I wish was in there, was there was going to be a moment where Ash goes out and has like a, kind of a brief meeting with the Deadites to try and talk about terms before the battle. And he was going to offer them all the children of the village if the Deadites would just leave. It's like, dude, that's great. Like, I wish that stuff was in the movie. But yeah, like, I think just that character being so, not a typical Hollywood leading like role, I think that might have hurt Bruce Campbell too. And
it leads into why Bruce Campbell is so protective of that character and this franchise, because, like you said, the it goes from horror film to half remake, but also sliding into the more goofy territory, and then it becomes a silly time traveling fantasy film. Yeah, and like you say, it bombs. And when they're ramping up for a remake or reboot or whatever the hell this thing is, there's quite a bit of disagreements between the three people involved. One of the producers, Rob Tappert, and Sam Raimi, of course, and Bruce Campbell, all three of them kind of have to be on board every time something is being made regarding Evil Dead. And in this case, when the remake was starting to gain fruition, the biggest negative to the idea was Bruce Campbell. And I think a lot of it has to do with, well, number one, he did not want to be recast. He was like really, really dead set on no, don't recast me. And if I'm not in the movie, then why the hell would anybody come see an Evil Dead movie? And sounds like Sam Raimi has always felt like the Evil Dead franchise is, ripe for new filmmaking, new filmmakers taking the world that they've built and making it their own. So
I think Sam Raimi has always felt that the Evil Dead franchise is ripe for him making more money. I think that's like a bigger part of that, maybe.
Maybe that's yes. You're right. That's true.
But to be fair, Raimi has been very protective of it as well. One thing we should mention is in the in between, from Army of Darkness to this reboot that we're going to discuss today, and I'm sure you are aware of this, Chris.
Yeah.
We almost get Ash returning to the big screen in Freddy versus Jason versus Ash,
right,
which was meant to be the follow-up to Freddy versus Jason, and that actually came, by all accounts, or by a lot of accounts, that came a lot closer than people think it did. And it was Raimi who ultimately put the kibosh on that, primarily because he said, I still want to do more with Ash and Evil Dead, and if I let you make this movie, it's like setting like a continuity that I would then have to deal with, and I'm not sure I want to deal with that, which is pretty funny because the original trilogy has a fairly loose continuity as it is, and we're going to talk about that. I want to ask you questions about that.
Yeah.
But just like he did not want to, I think he just felt so protective. I don't think he wanted Ash in a movie that he wasn't directing, and I think he didn't want to not have any creative control over that character, which is that was almost like. I always wondered if that caused any kind of temporary rift between him and Campbell, because that cost Campbell another shot at a huge Hollywood, because that would have been a guaranteed hit, coming off of the success of Freddy vs. Jason, and that would have been a lead, another lead role in a Hollywood movie for Campbell, and Raimi said no.
It's funny too because, they were kind of setting him up to be big into Spider-Man 4 as well. And then Raimi saying no to that movie too kind of fucking squashed Bruce Campbell's rising star yet again. So yeah. It's funny because they're high school friends, right?
They've been friends for a long time. They still are friends, and this is a very interesting franchise. Which even today, as it continues to go, and I know we'll talk more about this at the end of the episode, but it is a 3-man franchise, as you said. It's these 3 guys, Raimi, Campbell, and Rob Tappert, and they all kind of have to sign off on everything. And I'll have more to say later about what I think that does to the franchise today. But I guess I get it, right? It's kind of nice that there's never been an attempt from one of them to steal it from the other two, or they haven't tried to shut one of the other guys out. Even though I think you can just look at some of what we're going to discuss today and see how it must be pretty complicated. And obviously the 3 of them don't always agree, and it has led to some, complications in the past, but because they were always in it together since the beginning, they've decided to stick together. Mm-hmm. And look, they're all getting money off of it today. So I think they've probably found their way.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does Fede Alvarez come into this? Well, we've talked about this in the past too, but in the mid 2000s, YouTube was kind of a nice playground for filmmakers to throw their shorts on there and gaining the attention of Hollywood. And in 2009, Fede Alvarez made a movie, Panic Attack, and threw it on YouTube. And it's about 5 minutes long. It's very raw, handheld cinematography. It's basically showing giant robots and aliens attacking the city. It's totally dialogue free. They have the music from Sunshine, of course, because everybody used the music from Sunshine for about 5 years there after that movie came out.
And then again when Wonder Woman 84 came out.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. There's really nothing to it other than he made it on a shoestring budget, and he made it. It's clever special effects, and got this thing made, and it looks pretty good. For 5 minutes with no dialogue. I mean, it's totally fine. You know what I mean? But it got the attention of Sam Raimi, and Sam Raimi actually wanted to make that into a feature, or produce it at least. And Bruce Campbell has said that thing was in development hell, as I think most Hollywood stuff becomes. But it never got off the ground. But then it got Fede Alvarez to pitch his take on the Evil Dead if he was to come and make a sequel for Raimi. And I guess they just really liked what he had to say. So they
Well, yeah, I
hired
think,
him.
like you said, I think like Raimi has been like even more vocal about this in recent years. But I think if he's not going to be directing these Evil Dead movies himself,
Yeah.
I think he has this idea of like, wouldn't it be interesting if we always get these like kind of up and coming European filmmakers,
Totally.
or it's just from a different country to like different with like, different cultural sensibilities and backgrounds to give like to take a whirl at it. And the connection between Panic Attack and hiring him for Evil Dead makes sense because I think we were alluding to this already, but the Evil Dead movies are very style-driven movies.
Yes.
Like that's where Sam Raimi's very unique camera style, his very unique aesthetics were born. And as you said, the first one in particular is very, and even Evil Dead 2 to another degree, very like low budget and very like scrappy, and the way they put out together these special effects. Like the classic Evil Dead effect of that evil demonic force that runs through the forest, and you're kind of seeing through the eyes of the force. That's just like Raimi attaching a camera to a 2x4 and having people hold a 2x4 on each end and run with it,
Yeah.
and then they smash it right through a truck, like a car window if they need to. And it's just like that kind of stuff. And I think he likes to see like filmmakers who, like him, with a low budget, are still trying to come up with crazy camera moves and, really unique like compositions, because ultimately Evil Dead is a franchise that should, even if it's not an Ash movie and even if it's not a Raimi movie, you want it to have like a visual sensibility that somewhat connects it to his trilogy.
Yeah. Yeah, it really comes together in the style, right? And also the super gore fest of it all too, right? If you have those pieces of the pie, you get an Evil Dead movie, with or without Ash, in my opinion. So it's kind of I don't mean this in a mean way, but it is style over substance with these films a lot of the time.
Often, yeah.
Yeah, so you have Fede Alvarez, who is making unique camera movements and this and that, and it plays really well with this franchise, and it's something that Raimi wants to keep going, right? So it's not an Evil Dead movie could do many of the same things, as we'll probably talk about, but if it's stylish enough or if it's unique enough to that director, I think it works,
So then once you have a director and you've figured out like, the stylistic connection to the original, you need a cast. And now we already mentioned that Bruce Campbell was very adamant that he didn't want anyone else playing Ash. But also at this time, it was pretty clear it was not going to be Ash. This was meant to be like a reimagining. I do remember, actually, this came to me like while I was watching the movie again this weekend. I'd kind of forgotten about this, but when this was first announced and they were discussing like a new Evil Dead, first of all, I should say, I'm sure we brought this up in previous like horror remake episodes, but whenever you announce a remake of a beloved horror property, 70% of the fandom loses their minds and are instantly against it. And that was certainly the case with Evil Dead. And like there was a lot of people, and then when they're like, well, Ash isn't even going to be in it, and like, oh my, what are you talking? That's not Evil Dead. And that even goes into like the response to this film, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I've been very like pro, or just at the very least fine with horror remakes for a very long time. So I was kind of on board. And I actually was like, I didn't know at the time when it was first announced that they were just going to leave Ash out. So I remember having discussions with friends about who should be the new Ash, because that's the direction I thought they'd go. And I just want to bring this up, Chris, because I want to run the idea by you that I had back then. In my mind, there was only one person in Hollywood that I thought could be like the new Ash and like live up to the legacy of Bruce Campbell, and that was Johnny
Carrie
Knoxville.
Elways.
No, Johnny. I wanted it to be Johnny Knoxville.
Oh, really?
Because I thought Johnny Knoxville kind of has the look, and then I could see Johnny Knoxville, in that Evil Dead 2 style, just getting tossed around a cabin for like 2 hours,
Right.
Like I just thought he has the same kind of funny, but but still charismatic, actual acting chops, which he doesn't get to show all that often. But he could also just be beat up for 90 minutes. So that was my pick. But obviously they decided to go in a different direction.
Yeah, you saw Men in Black 2 and was like, oh, we got to get this guy for sure.
I don't hold Men in Black 2 against him. I remember him being one of the bright spots in it, but
Sure.
all I remember is like going to see that movie and like obviously hating it like everyone else.
Yeah.
And then like wondering I haven't seen it since the theater. I think we've talked about this before, but probably in our Men in Black International episode. But I have a memory of like Johnny Knoxville just like disappearing from the movie at a certain point. Like not even like being in the final act and being like, what happened to that character? And just like, oh, okay, I guess whatever. Take the best character and just leaving him out now. But,
yeah. I like Johnny Knoxville. I think Jackass 4 really showed again what he's willing to do for the audience, and it's pretty impressive. That bull thing was pretty impressive. He got basically knocked out, right?
Oh yeah, like
Yeah.
major concussion on that.
And
one.
then he major concussion. And then he like woke up, and the first thing he said was like, "Did we get it?" It was very cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would never do that. I'm not stupid, but
No.
I guess maybe I would for hundreds of millions of dollars. Who knows?
But don't get me wrong. Ultimately, I think they made the right choice of just going without Ash, and especially since, and I don't even think they were planning it at the time, because Bruce Campbell is also around the time of this reboot. He does Q&As all the time. He goes and screens old movies of his, and does these like really fun Q&As he's become known for, where he's very mean to the fans, but in a loving way. Like that's the whole gimmick. People ask him questions, and he's just like a total asshole. But that's like the shtick, right? You want him to be a jerk to you when you ask him a question. And for years, up to the point of this remake, and since even beyond, people would ask him, when are you going to play Ash again? And he was always like super adamant that he's like, I'm too old to play Ash now. He's like, do you really want to see Ash with like a walker? He'd always talk about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and how embarrassing it was to see like an old Indiana Jones. I can only imagine what he thought of Dial of Destiny. But he was just like always like, I don't want to play Ash anymore. So it made sense that he was, that they had to find some new characters for this one.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't have Ash in this movie, but we have Lily Collins playing the lead role of Mia, but we don't actually, because she drops out. Phil Collins' daughter drops out of the movie. She's actually the lead in The Mortal Instruments, City of Bones, another movie we covered on this podcast. What was our thoughts on Lily Collins? Do we like her? She's fine, right?
I kind of have no opinion of her. This is what I'll say about that is, again, all these memories came flooding back whenever I revisit this movie.
Yeah.
It's not like I had no opinion of her at the time, because obviously I hadn't seen anything with her really when she was cast in this. But I specifically remember when she dropped out and when she was replaced. I guess we could talk about who replaced her now. Yeah. I was happy. I was excited because she was replaced by Jane Levy. So Jane Levy is the lead of this, and this is at a point where I was actually a fan of the show Suburgatory, which is kind of like the show that made Jane Levy's name. She'd been in some things before then, a couple like smaller roles in some movies, but Suburgatory was like an ABC sitcom that she was the lead of, where her and her dad, played by Jeremy Sisto, they've lived in like the big city their whole lives, and then they moved to the suburbs, and it's all about the craziness of the suburbs.
Right.
And I really liked her in that. First of all, I was instantly had a crush on her, but just also found her like very funny, very charming, very winning. So I was very excited to hear that she was cast as the lead in this.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't know her before this movie, so she doesn't really hit anything for me either. Like I know her from this movie, I know her from Don't Breathe, but other than that, I guess you almost had a chance to meet her recently.
Yeah, I was kind of bummed. She was supposed to be at a convention that I attended just a few weeks ago, horror convention, and unfortunately she canceled for work reasons. But hopefully one day I'll get to meet her.
Could have got her on the podcast, got a little bit of an audio quote or something. But
yeah, maybe.
You failed us.
Or I could have been maced in the face. So who knows?
Well, if that was on record too, that'd be great.
And a restraining order filed against me. So.
All right, I guess it was a blessing in disguise. Yeah, I don't know. Do you want to talk about the movie now?
Yeah, let's get into it, I guess.
Okay.
David. Please. Please. You have to get me out of here.
Leave this book alone.
No. You don't understand. There was something in the woods. And I think it's in here with us now.
You are all going to die tonight.
I read a passage from that book. I released something evil. Oh my God! What did you do that?
time to go to sleep.
All right, the plot is as follows. Mia is determined to quit her drug use cold turkey. To that end, she asks her friends Olivia and Eric and her estranged brother David and his girlfriend Natalie to accompany her to their family's cabin in the woods to help her through the withdrawal process. Eric finds a mysterious book in the basement and through his curiosity reads aloud from it, which awakens an unspeakable horror. All hell then breaks loose when the malevolent entity possesses Mia and threatens to kill them all by sunrise.
Yeah, good, easy plot synopsis. As you said, there's not much substance always in an Evil Dead movie, but there's a lot of style. Although I think there's a little bit of substance here, which we'll talk about and was hinted at in your plot synopsis. But Chris, since I was an Evil Dead fan for longer than you, and since I walked into this movie as someone very familiar with the trilogy and like, kind of with the show me what you got attitude, I'll go first on this one and talk about how I felt about it, then and how I feel about it now, which is pretty much still the same. It's my opinions on this movie have never changed, and that is I think this movie rocks. I love the 2013 Evil Dead. And honestly, there are some horror films, and it's particularly usually the case with these reboots and these reimaginings. I know the Friday the 13th remake in particular, which we've covered before, is another example of this, where you'll see a large segment of the original fan base like vocally just hate the film. And like say like, oh, it's such a disgrace, and I'm always sitting there just like so confused. So I know we had this discussion with Friday the 13th where I was like, yeah, it's like it's a little bit got more modern style and it's like a little bit glossier, but this is a Friday the 13th movie, And like
yeah, totally.
I just never understand the people who are like, oh, this is just pissing on Jason Takes Manhattan and the New Blood. Like, what are you talking about? And same thing here. I think the 2013 Evil Dead, while not being a Sam Raimi movie, is so in the spirit and tradition of the trilogy he had done, and in particular the first film, which is what obviously Alvarez was really trying to kind of more recreate the spirit of, is that kind of more straightforward gore fest horror, very little humor in this, just a little bit peeking through, but taking this back to its like gritty basics, and I just loved it. I mean, look, this is a studio film, it's gnarly, and like it's gnarly by today's standards. I was watching it again this weekend being like, whew, like just, I remember being like blown away by how gnarly this was in the theater, or like how gory and how extreme it was. And I still feel that way. And I think like, I wonder if it's like, you don't see like big studio stuff getting released like this today. I know you and I just both recently saw The First Omen, which is like, a Disney distributed 20th Century Fox Omen prequel that had some like sequences in it that I was like, whew, I can't believe they're doing this in like a studio movie, right? This movie's like full of moments like that. We're like, man, they're really going for it. And obviously I want to hear what you have to say, but the last thing I'll just do in my general thoughts here is I do think this movie has some very clever subversions of like what we expect coming into an Evil Dead movie, like all the way to the point of who you think the main character might be, and having the character of Mia's brother seeming like an Ash substitute, only to kind of pull the rug out from under you and have Mia be like a final girl. And particularly like the characterization of Mia and the whole thing about the drug addiction and going cold turkey. I think that actually adds something very clever to the story. So yeah, ultimately, at the end of the episode, I'll tell you like my Evil Dead rankings, but I think this movie is totally in conversation with the original trilogy, and is not like, this is nowhere near a black eye in the franchise or anything like that. This is a great addition to the franchise. I love this movie.
I have seen each entry of this franchise once.
Okay.
So that's
very
my
different
history.
than me.
Yeah, totally different. My history started with this film, which is funny. And then 4 years later, I went through the trilogy. And then I recently watched Evil Dead Rise that came out last year. So going into this one at the time with like no knowledge of really anything. Like I know a little bit of the iconography at the time, but I wasn't nearly as, film buffed out back then. So I really enjoyed it back then, and I really enjoy it still. Like, I think this movie's pretty damn good. I really love the first Evil Dead. I actually do like it more than number 2, but again, I've only seen them all once. But I've always thought the horror of it all is what speaks to me a little bit more than sometimes the goofiness does.
Well, that's the interesting thing about the not to cut you off. That's the interesting thing about the original trilogy is you'll meet fans who You meet fans who their favorite is the first one, their favorite is Evil Dead 2, or their favorite is Army of Darkness, and you're never like, well, that's dumb.
Right.
You know, like each
Right.
one of those makes sense. It's just about your personal sensibilities. So
Yeah, and that's why I think I like this one a lot, even though it does do things way less campy, right? Like there really isn't any humor in this movie. It starts off from a really brilliant place, I think. Like the drug addiction aspect, I think is perfect, because in a movie like this where somebody's either going crazy or they're going through like this panic, aggression, hysteria, and when their friends aren't really reacting to it, that'll annoy me, right? So setting the context that, oh, our friend is going through detox, it actually makes their reactions so much more understandable. You know what I mean? Like especially in the beginning, not when she's like, slicing her tongue in half and making out with her friend. That's different. But it normalizes her behavior in the perspective of her friends, which I think is just a brilliant take. The characters are less defined in this one. I think they work as a group of friends versus like, a jock, a nerd, a slut. You know what I mean? Like in that old school way of thinking. I like that it's just a group of friends. They all have immediate chemistry. I get it right away. They're not the most memorable bunch of characters, but I think Mia Jane Levy's so good in the role. I really like this. It is fucking brutal. When it comes to the absolute relentlessness of the violence and the gore. Gorehounds must go crazy for this. And I was in the mood for it, so it worked again.
And almost entirely practical, right?
Yeah,
like only CGI cleanup here and there. I mean, there's a couple of moments where like blood is pouring out of an orifice and you're like, it's a little CGI looking, but overall it's like 90% practical and it shows. And that's the thing, like when you say it's brutal, like this is a movie that pulls no punches, and that's why, and don't get me wrong, this movie also has a very dedicated fan base. I don't want to say the entire Evil Dead community like hates this movie, but there's a very vocal like group that does. And that's what always shocks me, where it's like they don't even want to give it credit for that. Like you gotta like, come on, like how can you not love the brutality of this movie if that's what you're coming for? Not just like like, this is where people say like, oh, horror fans are sick, but yeah, we like seeing this stuff. And but the reason we like seeing it is not necessarily the violence. We like seeing the creativity of the effects. And there is just like some just amazing like effects work in this, and it just boggles my mind that people sometimes don't even give it credit for that.
Well, it does what a remake should do. And I know there's, like you said, it's a reimagining, it's a remake, it's a sequel, it's a reboot. It's kind of all of the above. I think that's a little bit of, having their cake and eating it too. So like,
this is what I want to ask you about. We'll get there, but go for it.
Yeah. Like in my opinion, I really like this movie, but it is so obviously, I don't want to use the word aping in a bad way, because I think Fede Alvarez does make it his own, but it is clearly a remake of the first movie in a lot, like to me. And that's okay. Like it's okay to have remakes of things. Like it doesn't need to be a dirty word. It does it right because it gives you just enough of what came before. There's enough callbacks to not seem obvious, and it garners new fans. And I think that's totally okay. Like you don't have to hide. It's like, all these movies hiding that they're musicals. It's like, hey, just fucking tell us it's a musical. It's fine. And you'll get the fans or not get the fans. And I think in this one, it really works. It works in a remake sense. So yeah, you tell me what you're going with here. Then what's
well, no, that's
synopsis?
what I wanted to ask you about that, because like as we know, at the very start of the film, when they arrive at the cabin, Mia is waiting for her brother behind the cabin, sitting on a very familiar looking car, and that is the classic, the Sam Raimi car that's in all of his films. But for us, for Evil Dead fans, it is Ash's car. And so, and Fede Alvarez has been, he says it on the audio commentary, I believe. He said it in multiple interviews. He's like, that could just be an Easter egg, or that could be us saying this is the same cabin from the original film, and this is just happening at the cabin later. So this is in the same continuity. And obviously, we're going to talk about sequel plans later. But, I wanted to, that's just a little thing. I'm wondering about your opinion of it. But also as someone who, and once you saw this movie, you like revisited the original trilogy, you and I have had debates where I'm a much bigger fan than you are of like loose continuity. I don't think continuity should matter that much, especially in these kind of like long running franchises. I think it's kind of fun when filmmakers can play with continuity. You're more of like a stickler about that. So I wondered if did watching the Evil Dead series, which the beginning of Evil Dead 2 and the beginning of Army of Darkness kind of like retrofits and retcons what you saw before. Did that bother you, or were you just willing to go along with it? And then how do you feel about this possibly being like actually Evil Dead 4 and existing in the same continuity?
I'm like a little of column A, column B. Like I'm not. It's fine. Like those three movies, those original movies, you just have to be okay with it. You know what I mean? Like as stupid as that sounds, you just have to go in knowing that second movie is basically remaking the first one, and the third movie is retroactively changing things, and it's all just a bunch of gobbledygook, for a good time. So from that perspective, it's fine. If people want to tell me that this movie is the fourth movie, okay. If they want to say it's a remake completely, okay. I think this is one of the few series that I don't want to say gets a pass, but I mean, it does still annoy me. Like, of course it does. Like, you know me. This one is just like so obviously just retreading the first movie. And I think that's what kind of does annoy me. That when they want to try to sell it as a fourth movie, and like Fede Alvarez saying like, oh, those coincidences aren't coincidences. This just shows that there's like, the book is, it's cyclical, it's like poetry, it rhymes. And I'm just like, well, you're just recreating total shots and lines. So it's like, just fucking say it. It's fine. We're going with it. You know what I mean?
I guess my question to you about that would be like, is it worth getting annoyed because like, let's say this is the same, like in the same continuity, right?
Right.
Like, what else is going to happen to a group of people that suddenly summon these demons in a cabin, right? Aren't the same things just probably going to play out ultimately?
Well, maybe different lines and different camera angles.
Well, camera angles, that doesn't matter. That's the audience. That's a subjective, audience view of what's happening. So that's like, if you're talking about aesthetics, that's not adhering to the story that's being told. But I think there's like enough changes in this. And actually, this is a movie that, interestingly enough, and maybe I was going to say this for later, but I'll just say it now. This is a movie that like plays even a little better in the wake of Ash vs. Evil Dead, the TV show that happened after this. Because that show actually expanded the Evil Dead mythology in ways that the movies were never able to. Obviously, having more time to play with and just having to like, have more mythology to justify a 3-season show.
Right.
And in that show, that's where we like learned about how there are actually, in fact, multiple Necronomicons, and these different books can summon different types of demons. So, in the original like trilogy, it was just kind of this like generalized idea. You play the recording or you read from the book and you unleash deadites. These deadites show up. And this one actually has a very particular deadite that is being summoned called the Abomination. And the Abomination has a very particular plan and very particular rules. And those rules weren't necessarily verbalized in the original trilogy. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, you can read this as it's the same cabin, but that's definitely like a different Necronomicon. And so it's summoned a different thing. And it's like, wow, that actually works fairly well. I don't know. I don't think that was their thinking at the time, but it's like
it definitely was not.
Definitely was not, but retroactively it works to where now you're starting to say, oh, that's the way you can build out this franchise, is that there's different versions of these books and they all do slightly different things.
Yeah. No, sure. It's a way to make more money, for sure. Definitely.
Well, yeah.
I guess, like, I mean, that's fine. I never saw that show, and I know you've been telling me that I should watch it, and now that it is finished and there's 3 seasons, I think easily available in Canada as well. I should get to it. But I guess it just goes back to, like, multiverse is so hot right now kind of thing that I'm just like, okay, well, it's the same shit we give Disney and Star Wars. It's the same criticism we give to them, being like, well, I shouldn't need the homework to retroactively realize that this is a different demon, even though it's like the same.
Well, that's why I think this movie does play it very well, and that you obviously it does. Your like testament to this is that you can just watch this movie and have it work as a horror film without seeing the other ones.
Oh, for sure.
But it also I think does work as it works as a standalone. It works as a reimagining / remake, or it works as a fourth movie. And like I think that's a benefit of the original series having that loose continuity, and that even plays to this, right? Because even the thing about the car being there and Fede Alvarez being like, well, that's Ash's car. Well, if I'm going to put on my Evil Dead nerd goggles for a moment, it'd be like, well, but the car shouldn't be there because the car was sucked back into the past with him, and it didn't come back to the future when he leaves. So it's like
actually it's all bullshit.
Yeah, but
it's obvious bullshit.
But you say that's bullshit, but then again, the beginning of Army of Darkness doesn't match the end of Evil Dead 2. So it's like you've already established that these connections are like loose, and I like that. So it's like whatever. Like when you're dealing with mystical books, you can explain away any of this stuff.
Right. You give a lot of pass to the horror genre, so I'm allowing you to say your piece, but yeah, you give a lot of
Well,
pass.
as I've said, there are other. I mean, I think this applies to like the James Bond franchise. It applies to Mad Max. I just think
Yeah.
too often people become slaves to hard set continuity, and I think you should instead concentrate more on the story of the movie you're making. And if it requires little things that don't match up with the previous films, it's fine. These are just stories at the end of the day, you know.
Right.
Yeah. If
I
you
guess it's
suddenly
just-
want to
yeah, yeah.
reveal that Bumblebee worked with Harriet Tubman on the Underground Railroad, go for it.
No. No, it's stupid. It's
All right,
stupid.
let's get off this
Anyway,
topic, and instead
all
let me ask you if you agree with this. I don't know if you're going to agree with me on this, but
Sure.
we already both mentioned that we like Jane Levy in this,
Mm-hmm.
but revisiting it for this latest viewing, and I don't even know what number of viewing this was. I was like really in this movie when it came out, and especially when it first hit Blue. I watched it a lot. It'd been a
Right.
couple years now, but I revisited it, and I go in knowing I like the character of Mia, knowing I like Jane Levy, but man, watching it this weekend, I was like, is this like one of the best like studio horror performances of like the modern era? I think she's actually like, I don't want to, brilliant is a crazy word to throw around for this kind of performance, but she is really, really good in this. Like the way she's playing the paranoia, and I mean, even just like the detox at the beginning. But when she gets like into the car accident, and we'll get into the tree rape sequence. But when she comes back from that, and she's trying to convince her brother about what is happening to her, like you mentioned, like, and they don't believe her. I just think the performance she's giving is so good, and I think that's what you said. She is the character that sticks out, not just because she's ultimately the final girl. But she is putting a level of performance into this that, like, honestly, Bruce Campbell never did. Different kind of performance,
Totally.
But she's kind of, like, outclassing what this movie is asking for at times, I think.
Listen, you gotta get out of those clothes.
You have to get me out of here.
Look, nobody said this is gonna be easy.
You don't understand. There was something in the woods, David. And I think it's in here with us now.
No, she's excellent in this, and I think what she does so well is, well, first of all, it's just a very fearless performance, especially taking the role to this huge franchise, being the main star, and getting completely just kind of mutilated and looking disgusting and always playing the hysterical and then going back and forth. It's very, gross and disturbing. But there's this underlying sweetness that she brings to Mia. And I think it's a great way in the very beginning where you see her talking to her brother about, watching her mom go crazy and then eventually die and having to witness all that. And she just feels very subdued. Like she's depressed, right? Like she's a very depressed person and has looked to drugs to feel better about things. And she's at a fork in the road, And I think that's why, well, I don't really want to spoil things, but go see, watch Evil Dead. I right now I'll just say I recommend it, so watch it. But when she comes back to being her old self at the end to eventually be the final girl, you're rooting for her, even though you watched her the whole movie torment all her friends and do some just insanely crazy things. So it's a real testament to Jane Levy to go full circle in only 90 minutes. It's very interesting. And I just think she's excellent. Also, I just think all the women in the Evil Dead movies, in this one and the newest one, Evil Dead Rise, man, it must be so fucking fun for them to let loose, go total Bananarama batshit, gooey, gory, and just get wild in these types of performances, because I feel like, especially in this one, like all the women are so good at playing deadites. Like they're just so good. And in the new movie, what's her name? Alyssa Sutherland, I think is her name, right?
I believe so, yeah.
She's incredible at it too. It just it must be just so freeing to play a role like this, don't you think?
Oh yeah, well I will say there's like a thin line there between fun and like a nightmare, because I know
Sure.
Jane Levy has also been open about what a tough experience making this movie was. And
Oh, it
they
looked
even-
like absolute hell.
And they told her that going in, right?
Yeah.
And they were like kind of proud of that. It's almost like almost to the point of like, come on, guys, you might be overdoing it, because there is this like long-standing thing about how Sam Raimi just loves beating up Bruce Campbell. You know, whenever you watch the original movies and something is coming from off screen and hitting Bruce Campbell in the head, or something's being thrown at him, turn on the audio commentary, and I guarantee you Sam Raimi will be saying like, well, that's me doing that. Like, he just loves it. And I think they wanted to like keep that spirit alive. So like there was all this discussion when the movie was being made that both Bruce Campbell and Fede Alvarez warned Jane Levy that this is going to be really tough because we're going to like beat the crap out of you. And apparently they like lived up to that. And I think like, I don't know, I think they were trying to wear that as like a badge of honor. And maybe they weren't always as like consoling to her on set as they could have been. Because I remember when the movie was done, there was like some moments where I was worried about there maybe not being a sequel, just because she was like, that sucked making that, you know, like it seemed like she was like so miserable. And I think only like almost like it's there was a couple of years there where, you know, obviously she went back and worked with Fede almost immediately right after this for Don't Breathe. So obviously she liked him.
Yeah.
It sounded like maybe like the Evil Dead experience was like so traumatic for her that she didn't want to go back into it. And in more recent years, she's, I think, you know, with the benefit of time and getting away from it, now you often see her saying, like, when am I coming back? You know, when are we going to do it again? But I think definitely stepping right out of it, she was like, oh my God, you guys buried me alive. You poured all this, like, these fluids on me. You put me through all this crazy makeup. You tied me up in trees. Like, Jesus. Like, I think she had a really rough time with it. But but you would hope there was still some level of fun to it.
Yeah, I guess what I mean is just so much in Hollywood, you know, young women need to look their best and look beautiful and have this gaze put upon them, you know? And I guess when you throw the Deadite makeup on and you have, you know, your arm has been cut off, or, you know, you have these prosthetics on you, and you just get to completely disappear into a role. You know what I mean? It's kind of the way that, you know, like there's no wonder people love playing the Joker. You know what I mean? It's you get to completely go throw a bunch of makeup on and be totally weird and wacky and crazy, right? You get to not
and you get an Oscar.
Yeah, and you get an Oscar. So,
sorry, Jared.
yeah, for sure. So that's what I guess that's what I mean. I'm coming from. Maybe it's not super fun, but it's freeing.
But you're right that she also gets the best of both ways, because she gets to play a Deadite for like 70% of the movie and have all that fun, but then she also gets to be the hero at the end. You know, like she gets to do both, and that's pretty cool. And like I said, I think that's kind of cool too. In that I think the other, like, you know, she's obviously the standout performance and the standout character. I think everyone else is fine. They're like, as you said, they're like lesser defined characters.
Yeah.
But I think for like, you know, like the good version of just like the stoic hero role, Shiloh Fernandez as the brother, as David, he's pretty good in this too. I think I like him in this, but also I thought it was very clever, and I think it works to a certain degree. Like, I went in knowing Jane Levy's the biggest star, so she's probably like the main character,
right?
But I think they were smart to put Shiloh Fernandez in a blue shirt and have him look like the Ash stand-in, and have the trailer kind of focus a little bit more on him. And so I think a lot of people probably were expecting him to be like, oh, he's the hero, right? He's the guy who's going to take us to the end, especially when, you know, at a certain point he has to dispatch of his sister. And I think that's actually a pretty clever like reversal and inversion too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you mentioned all that fluid being thrown on her.
A lot of fluid in this movie.
They actually they used about 70,000 gallons of fake blood in this movie. 50,000 of that was just for that fiery, blood-pouring carnage of a finale, which is awesome. No notes.
Yes.
No notes. No notes other than the CGIing some nipples and butt crack out. That for sure.
Yeah. Actually, I have another slight note, and it's like the most nitpicky. Like, this is where I'm going to be like probably annoying, because my only complaint about the end, and it always has been, okay, so spoiler territory, folks. As we said, we are spoiling some stuff from the ending now.
Yeah.
But obviously, a very classic moment in Evil Dead 2 is the moment where Bruce Campbell, as Ash, his hand is bitten and it becomes possessed, and his hand starts beating him up. And he has to cut it off with a chainsaw, which leads, of course, to the most iconic element of Ash, him creating like the chainsaw hand to wear. And so obviously they wanted to pay homage to this, to that in this, and Mia ends up with one of her hands gone too. And it's always kind of bothered me, though, that she gets her hand pinned over like a Jeep that gets turned over on her, and she's right next to a chainsaw. And instead of just going for it and like doing it the way they originally did and having her grab the chainsaw and cut her hand off, I kind of hate that she just like pulls her arm away from her hand. Like I don't know if I buy it in the moment. Like I know this movie is like ridiculous, but and I know when you're pinned like that, you have these like moments of superhuman strength. But it's like it's just like so kind of gnarly and so like over the top, and I'm like, oh, couldn't they have just have her grab the chainsaw and do the same thing? But that's pretty nitpicky, I know.
Right. So you want them to just repeat more things?
I mean, there are certain iconic things where, like, when they make sense, you know, like she is reaching for the chainsaw, so why not do it, you know?
I guess. I guess maybe it goes to your subverting thing, right? That they're like, that's what you expect to happen.
Yeah, I think that's what I think that is what they were thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. It is gross though when she's ripping her fucking hand and you see all like her skin getting torn apart.
Well, yeah, that's the benefit. Then when she holds up her stump and it's not a clean cut, it's like actually very, very gross looking and gnarly, and it's like just pulled apart with bones sticking out. Yeah.
And also, it does. If it was that way with the chainsaw, it would have taken away from that sweet finale of her using the chainsaw truly, which was just incredible.
Which is one of my favorite shots in a horror movie all the time. You know, like, and I've always wanted just a great like painting or something of that image because I think it's
you're absolutely disgusting. You're a sick person. You're sick.
Come on, that is a great image. Like the image
sure. Throw it above your mantle and have a dinner party. For people that don't know, the shot is there's a burning cabin in the background, and Mia, it's raining blood.
Raining blood.
It's in the night, and Mia has the deadite. The deadite is on their stomach, facing Mia, and Mia has thrown the chainsaw through its head and its mouth, and chainsawing it in half, and the blood is just going crazy, and that is what Trev wants framed in his house.
Look, can I once again remind you, I saw the original Evil Dead trilogy when I was 12. This is what happens. You know? Yeah.
The MPAA is meaningful. No, it's great. It looks awesome, and like I love an explosion. So when there's the cabin in the background being burnt to shit, it's pretty sweet. So
I mean, you want your villain dispatched in a memorable, cool way, and it doesn't get much better than that. You know.
Oh yeah. Now, okay. Because it's hard to make out that demon. Who is that demon? Is that the one from the beginning, or is it just a demon? Like, is it just a deadite? Like, were we supposed to recognize them?
Well, that's the abomination. So there's the moment where Eric, the Lou Taylor Pucci character, Axel's Lou Taylor Pucci, we should point out, who plays who plays the friend in this. When he's explaining like the mythology that he's figured out from reading the translations in this version of the Necronomicon, he says that what they have is there's a deadite that has possessed Mia. And that demon is almost like the Silver Surfer for the abomination. It's like the Herald. That demon's job is to collect 5 souls, so kill 5 people, and then that unleashes a demon called the abomination. That's basically like the final boss at the end. And that's what I mean. Like, this is actually the first Evil Dead movie to ever... Well, I guess there's Evil Ash and Army of Darkness, but that's more like, well, that's just an Ash clone that takes the leadership role. But this is the first time that they've given, like, the Deadites kind of like, oh, look, there's like a main Deadite. And that is something that would then continue into Ash vs. Evil Dead, where it's like, oh, no, there's all these, like, different demons, and they all have kind of, like, different things they're trying to accomplish. So this is almost kind of like the beginning of that. I mean, you're not wrong in that it's not established as much as it could be, but it is
or at
mentioned. No, it is. I mean, they show they show the illustration in the Necronomicon, and when she comes out of the ground, it looks exactly like that. And they even, for those of you who are dumb, they do that thing where they like when she comes out of the ground, they do like a little flashback to that page. And you're supposed to go, oh yeah, yeah, I can remember. Thanks. It's not a long movie, but
I liked that part of it too. I can't remember the old movies that well. Like I said, I only saw them once, but in the book, it illustrating kind of what's going to happen to our characters. Is that in the first movie? That's not in the first movie, right?
No,
okay.
It's not. Yeah.
I like that. I thought it was a nice little foreshadowing thing and kind of bookending everybody's death. I like that.
I mean, ultimately, I don't think this Necronomicon is nearly as interesting looking as the original, and I don't think the artwork in it is like as cool and iconic as the artwork that Tim Sullivan did for the pages of the original trilogy.
Right.
But you're right that idea is kind of neat, where like everything that happens to him, there's a corresponding illustration in the book.
Yeah, it leads to my first major cringe moment from terror, or not terror, but like just horrific imagery, is when it shows somebody's like taking their skin off. right? Like in their face. And then Eric goes into a room, and all you hear is like the sound design on this. And I'm a big sound guy. You know that. I'm a big audiophile. And the sound of Olivia cutting her fucking face apart before seeing her is really, really effective.
Olivia, what are you doing in there? Olivia. Olivia. Are you okay? Oh my God!
Again, the gore is really, really effective. It is outrageous to a level that makes it a little campy. You know what I mean? Like earlier I said it's not as campy as the original, which it's not, especially in its humor. But I think when it comes to the gore, it's effective, but just so big, you know, that it kind of does add that campy Evil Dead vibe. You know what I mean? It's not just another Cabin in the Woods movie. That's how this becomes an Evil Dead movie without Ash. You know what I mean?
I kind of agree. I think I don't find it to necessarily be campy. It's actually interesting to me how brutal they allow a lot of the violence to just play without going like silly with it. Because like, you know, like the moment you said, like where she's cutting off her face and attacks Eric, and like when she's like stabbing him with a syringe, it's just like it's harsh, you know. And then like we should maybe we should just do a listing of like cringe moments, because there's a lot of them in this. You know, like you mentioned like. You already said the slicing the tongue with the box cutter, which was like in the Red Band trailer. I remember that was like a moment where it's just like, okay, this is going to be a good movie, you know.
And then she makes out with her friend too.
Yes,
and it's just absolutely disgusting.
Yeah. The getting the hypodermic needle in the eye and having to pull it out. That's another one that I think is pretty rough.
Scalding herself in the shower.
Yes. Yeah, that's good. Let's see, the nail gun, you know, like
cutting her arm off with the turkey cutter, the electrical turkey knife.
That's pretty. Yeah, so there's not the original, obviously, the arm cutting scene, but I do love that she doesn't cut it all the way off, and when they first walk in, she's like, "Oh, I feel better now," and her arm is just kind of hanging by one last little strand of skin before it finally falls off. This is, like I said, this movie ain't playing around.
Yeah.
So.
Mia gets raped by a tree.
All right, we need to talk about this sequence, because the tree rape sequence.
Trev's like, I would like that as a framed print.
Well, I just bring it up because it's a complicated thing to talk about, because it's become a very infamous scene in the original Evil Dead.
Yeah,
the tree rape sequence where it's very much what it sounds like. A woman goes out into the woods, and the trees attack her. We see like the vines of the tree grab her legs, pull them apart, and then a branch go up where it does not need to be.
I also want to remind our listeners right now, Trev said it's not just redoing things from the original, because that's what would happen in a Cabin in the Woods all the time.
What?
This would just always happen, right? In a Cabin in the Woods movie, it's just trees gonna rape somebody. It's definitely not just a remake.
That's the point. That's the point I actually kind of want to make, is that it's surprising to me that it's in this movie, and I don't know for sure, but I wonder if Fede Alvarez had to fight for it, or if this reveals like that how like Raimi, Campbell, and Tappert are kind of full of shit, and that's where I lean, because they've often said that. In retrospect, they wish they hadn't done that scene in the original, and they wouldn't do it today. But then they still have a tree rape sequence in the reboot too, you know. And it's like, yeah, I mean, and also, but here's my thing: is like as awful as this is going to sound, like it is such an iconic moment that like I'm not like offended by it being back. And it's obviously it's weird to say it's like less extreme in this version than it is in the original, but it is like you kind of do expect to see it. I just think I think it exposes them as like being full of shit when they're like, oh yeah, no, we agree with everyone who says that we went too far, we wouldn't do it. It's like, well, yeah, but you had a chance to like not do it here, and you just went ahead and did it again, you know.
Mm-hmm. In a movie that is far less campy.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't think the original Evil Dead is campy, and I know, and you're probably, maybe you're in that camp that disagrees with me. I think there are people who call it campy just because the effects aren't that great, and that's what makes people think it's campy. but I don't think tonally it's trying to be campy. The camp comes in part 2, I think.
Right. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. But just in general, like, the series became that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
After the last one was Army of Darkness, which is a Three Stooges movie, to go back to this tone and then again have the tree rape come back was quite shocking. Like, to be like, oh, okay, they really are trying to take Evil Dead back to something else.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Now, Chris, I get the sense that we're kind of starting to wind down here and we want to talk about the aftermath of this movie. But can I ask you, did you stick through the credits to see what might be the stupidest post-credit scene of all time?
Yes, I did. I actually, I didn't do that in the theater, I don't think.
I did. Imagine me like sitting in the theater being all excited and like being like, oh, I think there's going to be something, and then being rewarded with that.
Yeah. And what Trev is alluding to is the credits go, there's some voiceover stuff, I think that was from the original, right?
Yeah, pulled right from the original, yeah.
And then it goes to black, and then Bruce Campbell has filmed an extreme close-up, and he looks to the camera and says, "Groovy."
Mm-hmm. One of his signature catchphrases, as I asked.
And that's it.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah, no, it's stupid. it's just fucking dumb.
Did he do that so he could get like actor pay for this movie too? You know, in addition to producer pay, like what?
Probably, honestly, probably a little bit of an ego thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Bruce Campbell. I think he's great. He's a great presence, and he's really fun. But I do think that man has, you know, he's got an obvious ego to him. So he's probably like, well, you're not including Ash in this? Fuck you. I'm at least at the end of the credits. Mm-hmm. So
yeah.
Like, do you even think Fede Alvarez knew that was at the end? You know what I mean?
I'm imagining it probably wasn't his idea. Yeah.
No. Again, especially because the movie is so serious. Like, it is dealing with something so serious in detox and withdrawal and estranged family members and extreme violence, and then for him to just kind of show up at the end to say groovy is like, it's just kind of stupid. So
maybe I should just quickly say, because you keep saying it's like very, very serious and there's not much humor. At the beginning of this, I alluded to there being a little bit of humor poking through. What I'm talking about, and I'm curious if you agree or you find it as funny, it's like very dark. I think there's a very dark humor in just how much abuse the character of Eric takes, like how much he is put through. But then again, you watch it, you're like, oh my God, like this, they're just like, this character cannot get a break. And then you go like, oh, but he's the one who read from the book. So it's like justified, right? It's like, this is all happening because of him. So the movie's kind of like, yeah, you fuck up, you read the cantation, you unleash the Deadites, then you get it the worst, and he definitely does. And I think that's like darkly funny, just how much he's put, like how much of the ringer he's put through.
Yeah, and I like that it makes sense why he's so curious. He's set up as a teacher. So, and I think an English teacher, I think they say.
Yeah.
So it does kind of make sense that he's infatuated with the book and he wants to. Mind you, he does cut through barbed wire. You know, the book on numerous pages is like, don't fucking read this. And he's like, I'm going to read it.
But yeah, I'm an English teacher. I've seen every Evil Dead movie and the TV show. If I found that book, I would read it. So
we know. We know. Okay, what happened with this movie? Why are we even discussing it? Because it was a huge success, and critically pretty positive. So, like, what the original plans for this was? What, like, you were in the know at this point, obviously, right?
Well, I think there's two different discussions here about like what were Fede Alvarez's original plans and what were the producers' plans, you know? And I think that's where we see like time has like shown that there was a little bit of an impasse there, because I believe that Fede Alvarez went into this believing he was making maybe the beginning of a new like Evil Dead trilogy or something.
Right.
And I'm not to say the other producers didn't, because they also talked about this, but I think he was the most gung-ho one about it. And yes, what we are alluding to is that for quite some time after this movie, up till just like more recent years, Fede Alvarez kept saying, people keep asking, is there going to be a sequel to the 2013 Evil Dead? It did very well. People liked the character of Mia. And Fede Alvarez often talked about how, like, yes, his ultimate idea was to eventually get to a point where you have Ash come back and Ash and Mia team up. right? Like it's like the natural thing, you know. It's not even like that's not multiverse talk. That's just like, oh, it's the franchise like coming together. Like that would establish this was the fourth movie, and this already happened to Ash, and now he finds another one that's happened to, and they are two heroes together now. They're both missing a hand. They both have chainsaws. It's perfect, you know.
And it's post Avengers. Let's be honest. It's a post Avengers world.
But I don't think they were thinking of it that way. Like I'm actually gonna be honest and think I don't think Avengers factors into like their Evil Dead, you know, kind of like calculations as much as they just think, you know, we have this other heroic character now. We have the character people already like. And I think they might have even been looking at the same kind of trajectory, right? Where we can start with this one being really crazy, but then if you can start to have there be like a little bit more camp, you know, and you can just bring this all together. But yeah, like it just kept not happening. And like I said, for a while, I honestly wondered if part of that was Jane Levy not wanting to come back. But you eventually got to a point where she was also saying like, yeah, no, I'm ready. Like, you know, I love Bruce. You know, obviously he worked as a producer on that movie. We got along. I loved him. And she was often saying, I really want to make a movie where like my character meets Ash. Like that's cool. Like I'm ready to do it. Fede Alvarez was always saying, I'm ready to do it. You know, and it always seemed like in all these discussions that the holdup seemed to be coming from the producer side. And it was very strange. Like whenever there would be interviews with Raimi and Campbell talking about it, like they would acknowledge how successful the movie was, but they just never wanted to commit to that. You know, they would talk about it a little bit, but they would just always say like, yeah, we don't really know yet what we're doing with that franchise. And then sure enough, we ultimately got the TV show, Ash versus Evil Dead.
Right.
Which starts just a couple years later, 2015, right? Which brings back the character of Ash like in the central stage and is like obviously pitched much more comedically. You know, and doesn't acknowledge like any of this. But even during that 3-season run, there was always people that are like, is Mia going to show up this season? Like, is she going to pop up here? And it seemed like it could have happened, right? Like, why not? You've established that it's a possibility already. You've talked about it, and it just never did. And then on the movie front, after Ash vs. Evil Dead is canceled, unfortunately, unfortunately, I actually think it's fine that it only got the 3 seasons. Like, up to the end of the day, we still got 3 seasons of an Ash vs. Evil Dead show, and I like the way it ends well enough.
Right.
But it gets canceled. He then says, like, I'm now officially retired from playing Ash. You know, he's like, I was fine doing the TV show, but it was rough. He was kind of upset that the TV show wasn't promoted as much as he thought it should have been. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I said I have thoughts on Rob Tappert. I think there was a lot of talk about how there was some behind the scenes shenanigans in that show where Rob Tappert had very different ideas about what should happen than some of the showrunners. The showrunners kept getting changed. And it seems to me like maybe the final season wasn't as fun to film as the others. And so when that show is done, just Bruce Campbell officially says, I'm not going to play Ash in live action anymore. You know, I'll voice video games, but I don't want to play this character anymore. I'm old now. I'm even older than I was when I said I was too old. I did the show. I gave you more, but I'm done. And so that seemed to put like the final nail in the coffin for any potential Ash Mia meetup. And sure enough, then as you alluded to earlier, in 2023, we get Evil Dead Rise instead, which is from the director of Cronin. So they found another like young director who had made who had made some critically acclaimed horror stuff, and they gave him like the keys to the castle and said, "Here, do what you want to do." And he, you know, you talked about how this one is kind of a remake. He just says like, "Well, let's make the same movie but in an apartment complex instead. You know, instead of a cabin." I like that movie. It's probably my least favorite Evil Dead movie, but I still enjoyed it. But I can't lie that like, I think part of my why I'm not like over the moon about it or anything is that there'll always be a part of me that goes like, I'm still waiting for that Mia sequel, you know? And like, I feel like Fede Alvarez, first of all, I do think Evil Dead, the 2013 movie, is more intense and more creative and more of a like fun time than Evil Dead Rise. But I just think Fede Alvarez like deserves a shot at a sequel. And I think it's kind of weird that they pushed him to the side. And they're now like, even in the wake of Evil Dead Rise, they've now announced that they've hired like, I believe, a Russian director, Sebastian Vanacek, to make the next Evil Dead movie. And they said that'll be its own thing as well. And that's where, again, they're saying like, so now Bruce Campbell and Rob Tappert are like, and Campbell are pretty much saying like, our idea now is to just keep making these like standalone Evil Dead movies and get these young directors to do what they want with them. Part of me thinks that's cool, but part of me thinks what they're missing here is that, as I said earlier, what fans loved about the original trilogy was that you had a singular character to follow. Like, Ash was the star of Evil Dead. And I think they're falling into the trap of thinking the star is the book or the star is the Deadites, you know? And I think it's actually a shame to, like, not let us have a recurring hero. And I don't know. Like, I just feel like I know you're gonna like roll your eyes at this and say, now I'm asking for like a Marvel multiverse kind of thing. But because when the show ended, on the show, Ash had two sidekicks, Kelly and Pablo, who were great, and they became like the three of them called themselves the Ghost Beaters. They're great characters. You have Mia, you have the heroine from Evil Dead Rise. Like, I ultimately hope they kind of cave on this, and ultimately we do get some kind of movie that teams all these characters up, because it just feels like, to me, it's like a waste if you don't take advantage of the fact that you've seeded all these different characters who can meet up. And if you're just doing these standalones, I feel like that's going to get boring in a way that having heroes go across multiple films wouldn't to me.
Yeah, I could see it, but then again, you're dealing with continuity, right? It's like this is a weird franchise because you don't care about continuity, but then you want some continuity. You know what I mean?
Well, I would say
which is kind of what you're asking for. Which is it's just funny to hear. It's like this franchise is so twisted spaghetti in so many ways that it's like what do you want? Like, I don't really understand. Like, you say you don't want continuity, but then you want all these characters to appear together.
No, I've never said I don't want continuity. I said I don't mind loose continuity.
Oh, yeah,
That's why I feel like you and I are always at an impasse. Like, I think continuity can be like too strict and too adherent. But like, to me, like I said, I have no problem believing that the Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, Evil Dead and Evil Dead Rise, and the TV show all exist in the same universe. Right. Even though some of the things in the movies contradict each other. Like, it's just like, I don't have a problem thinking like all the initial, like some of the James Bond movies exist, even though, until you get to the Daniel Craig movies, right? Like, to me, Pierce Brosnan is playing the same character as Sean Connery, even though that makes no sense timeline wise, Right. Like, I don't care about this stuff. Or like how, George Miller said the timeline doesn't matter in the Mad Max movies. This stuff doesn't bother me. And I think Evil Dead, especially, it's like, well, whatever. Like, as long as you're just making a fun horror movie. But I do want to see these characters meet up.
Yeah. In the horror community, you'll have to tell me, but like Evil Dead Rise, to me, I absolutely loved. Like, I just completely adored it. I thought it was expert level craftsmanship. I was just so into it. No character was safe. A lot of fun too. I disagree with you saying that it's less creative. I think it's very creative, but in the horror community, which one is more accepted? Like, in the Evil Dead community, like, not even speaking for yourself, but try to speak for the community, please. I know you hold the meetings. So when this one versus the 2013, why has this? It seems like this newest one is being embraced more than the 2013. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're right. I think probably because even though it kind of is just doing the same thing, even just the change of putting it in the apartment building made it feel less, I do actually have some theories about this. That's one, right? So it's in an apartment complex. It's not in the cabin. So it feels less like a remake of the original. It's also coming in the wake of Ash vs. Evil Dead, right? So the 2013 movie, the fan base was like, oh, we're getting this instead of more Bruce Campbell, getting this instead of more Ash. But then you give us Evil Dead Rise, and it's like, well, you just gave us 3 seasons more of Ash, So it didn't feel like this is like stealing away from the franchise. It felt more like, okay, actually, you gave us like another movie that we liked, or most of us liked. You gave us more Ash. Now you can do whatever you want. So I think people are just going to be more lenient with this franchise now. I really think the 2013 Evil Dead had a couple things going against it. It had the fact that people thought like, oh, I'd rather just be seeing Ash and Bruce Campbell. It also came out only a couple years after Cabin in the Woods. Remember that? So
yeah, one year after, yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of felt like, oh, another Cabin in the Woods horror movie, and you're like making the movie that like Cabin in the Woods was satirizing, basically, and like showing all the tropes of. So I just think that one had more going against it than Evil Dead Rise did. But I think ultimately, when everything shakes out at the end of the day, I think everyone going to like kind of look at the movies almost like the same, like where people are just gonna be like, yeah, they're both good, but they're not the original trilogy. But that's ultimately like, I was like, I can give you a ranking if you want, but my ranking is pretty like boring and obvious. I just think like, to me, the great thing about Evil Dead is I would say Evil Dead and like in terms of like long running horror franchises, there's only 2, Evil Dead and Chucky, that to me have like never missed. And I know people like probably roll their eyes more at the Chucky thing. I know there's some people like really don't like Seed of Chucky, or there are people who don't like Chucky or don't like Child's Play 3. I'm not a huge Child's Play 3 fan, but I think it's good enough. But I think like that franchise has like a really strong like track record, and I think to me, Evil Dead has just never had a bad entry yet. I like all 5 movies, and I love the TV show. So it's like they haven't missed yet. I'm just worried they're going to start to miss if they just keep going. Oh, let's get another like up and coming foreign director and say just make another story with Necronomicon and put it in a different kind of place. What I actually want them to do now is either do the team up I'm asking for, or I think you need to get just even more wild with it and start playing more with genre and be like, okay, well, let's now make an Evil Dead Western. You know, let's make like an Evil Dead noir movie. Let's put the Necronomicon...
Like what Predator is doing right now?
Yeah, exactly, right? Like put the Necronomicon into different different locations, different time periods, different tonal pitches. You know, I mean, look, the original trilogy... Like we said earlier, right, that the original trilogy, all 3 are pretty different than each other. The first one is pure horror. The second one is horror comedy. And then the third one is even more slapstick comedy mixed with, like, don't you agree that the Evil Dead Rise is pretty similar to 2013 Evil Dead? And I'm worried that the next one's going to be pretty similar too. So like, it's like, I feel like now they're going to pitch all these at the same, like, we'll just keep making these like really gory, more intense, you know, Evil Dead's like, no, get back to like making some that are silly, some that are like serious, start varying it more. I think that's important for like the long running health of this franchise.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see it doing that. Rise was by far the biggest moneymaker, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that makes sense. But, yeah, I mean, I'm down for that. You get crazy with it, right? I think Rise is more different than you say than this movie, but especially in like the tone of it, I thought Rise had more of a cheeky sense of humor. So.
I may be right. I think my issue with Rise, like the reason Rise is my least favorite is I think like we talked about all like the really crazy like gore stuff in this one. Nothing necessarily about Rise like seemed like memorable to me in that way, you know. But what I will give Rise, and I know you and I talked about this at the time, is Rise has the best villain of the entire franchise. Yeah, you know, the fact that they finally had the idea to like, well, let's make like really like a main Deadite villain, and yeah, Alyssa Sutherland like nailed that. So like that's to me, she's like the standard of that movie. But and like when I say it's my least favorite, it's still like a 3.5-star movie for me. That's what I mean. It's just like I love this franchise, and there hasn't been a bad Evil Dead yet. So. Yeah.
Seeing that we revisited this one, I do want to go back and revisit the whole thing. Again, it's been so long, and I've only seen them once. But even looking back at my Letterboxd entries, yeah, none of them are bad to me. So I agree. I like all, 5 of these movies now to varying degrees. But you're so right that it's got a consistency to them, no matter what. So. Yeah, it's funny because Rise. I'm not like a Evil Dead head like you, but Rise is like so close to the top for me, which is just so funny to hear that it's your least favorite. That's so funny. It's
and that's what I wanted. Right? Like what I wanted to ask you. I can't remember if you said this at the beginning, but like, do you like the 2013 one more than the Raimi ones, or like how does it all fall for you? Because I'll just tell you really quickly. Like, so for me, Evil Dead 2 is the top. Like that's my favorite. Then Army of Darkness, then The Evil Dead, then the 2013 film, then Evil Dead Rise. That's how I would rank it.
All right. I mean, I haven't seen them in so long, but Rise and the original Evil Dead are probably neck and neck because I just liked them when they were just very horror centric, right? And then it's a toss up between 2, Army of Darkness and this remake. So. I think I wrote in my letterbox about Army of Darkness that I think it would have been my favorite movie if I was 5 years old.
I saw it when I was 12. You know?
Yeah, so there you go, right? Like it's one of those like perfect childhood movies, which is just one of those crazy movies that you saw as a kid that stuck with you.
Do you think you'd like it better if the studio had allowed them to keep the original intended title? Do you know this?
No, I don't know.
Because Army of Darkness is kind of like a weird title, right, for like an Evil Dead film.
Yeah.
What Raimi wanted to call it was the Medieval Dead, which is perfect.
Oh, Oh, that's lame. Why wouldn't they do that?
because they didn't want Universal was trying to trick people into not knowing it was the third movie in a series. Right? They said they wanted to sell it as a standalone. So yeah.
It's funny. I had actually blind bought Army of Darkness before watching well, I guess I had seen the remake, but before anything else, because Army of Darkness is always in like DVD bins.
Oh yeah. Well, Army of Darkness and Evil Dead 2 are kind of infamous for having like 300 DVD releases. They were just like
that
they,
makes
they
sense.
kept being re-released with like new special editions, and Army of Darkness in particular, like Anchor Bay alone released so many editions of that. You had the Boomstick edition and like the bootleg edition. I have like a 2-disc limited edition DVD still, even though I upgraded Blu-ray, but I have like one of those like numbered limited edition DVDs. And because then there was also like the multiple cuts, right? You might know about this, where like there was an original more downbeat ending that the studio made them change, but like you can like find like the DVD sets that have both cuts on it. So yeah, it's just a movie that's been released over and over and over again. It's strange though, because I do think as time has gone on, even though Army of Darkness was a huge and I don't know that, you know, I there are certainly people that's their favorite one, but I think Evil Dead 2 is usually the one that's like the cited as the most favorite one. But Army of Darkness is the one that like people still quote all the time. Like it's the most quotable one, and like I think like most of like the remembered Ash catchphrases and everything come from that movie. So it definitely finally found its life afterwards.
So wait, you're saying that this remake didn't have catchphrases like your little sister's being raped in hell?
No. There's a moment in this where when Mia is possessed and they throw her down in the cellar, and she attacks David's girlfriend, and he's pulling her out of the cellar. The possessed Mia looks at David and goes, "Why don't you come down here, pretty boy, and let me suck your cock?" And that quote is often used in like TikTok videos. People take it and put it into things. And it's weird that like I had forgotten that was from this movie, because I said it'd been years since I watched it.
Right.
And I've seen people use that in like TikTok videos, and then it came up and I watched the movie, like, oh yeah, that's from this. Oh, that's really weird that's like a possessed girl saying that to her brother, and people use it in like TikTok videos. Like,
that's funny. So I think we both would recommend Evil Dead, the 2013 remake. I
recommend the whole franchise. Check it all out.
That's true. I agree. I second that.
Yeah.
I'm not as hot on this one as you are, but like you said, I still really liked it. You know what I mean? So it's such an interesting conversation where you can have something like that can each one of these entries are good.
Well, like I said, because let's see, like let me just ask you this, and I know your answer, but I just so I can like slightly win this a little bit, but like even putting it aside as an Evil Dead movie, right? Like if this just came out today, this 2013 movie, it came out today as just like its own horror film. Like as I said, like don't you just think it's like we don't get horror films this brutal and intense and like fun that often even today, you know? Like,
yeah, I mean we got one last year and it was called Evil Dead Rise. That's the funny part is that this franchise does still do it, you know?
Yeah, it's like the only franchise that is like regularly still going for it, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah. And again, I liked it in 2013. So, and without any knowledge of the franchise really. So, I think it does really work on its own. Which is cool. Which is really cool. But that'll do it for Evil Easter. I think it was pretty successful.
Yeah, other than it, Easter not being this month, but other than that, like, I think it went pretty well.
You know what? There was an Easter Monday, and it was April 1st, so whatever.
We didn't. I mean, people probably picked it up, but at the beginning of the episode, we said that this and Evil Speak actually had a lot of similarities. So yeah, we ended up doing two horror movies with Evil in title, where people read incantations from an old book and unleash demonic forces.
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, Jane Levy, Clint Howard, basically the same thing, right?
Yeah, sure. Now you're never going to meet her.
I'm trying to picture like Suburgatory with Clint Howard playing the Jane Levy part.
Or Jane Levy playing the Austin Powers cameos.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So we love our themes as usual on this podcast. So we're moving into the summer. You know, it's bright and shiny out. The birds are chirping. It's the snow is gone finally, and we're moving in. You know what? TV, Trev. Follow me with my thinking here.
Oh, yeah, I go.
Okay, TV. When they do pilot season and stuff, and in the fall time, and they do something called sweeps, right? Like when they really they put a bunch of marketing dollars up front, and they're trying to get people to watch all the new shows and all this other stuff, right? Well, you know how I explained that sweeps happens in the fall usually, right? Am I right? I'm right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
No, wait, no, sweeps, spring. I think sweeps are more in the spring, right?
Do I know anything anymore?
Well, I'm not going to hold this against you because the TV landscape means nothing anymore.
Yeah,
you know?
that's what
It's
it
like
is. There's no such
yeah.
thing. So, well, whatever. We're gonna procure sweeps, and we're calling
Yeah.
it summer sweeps because fuck the networks.
Yeah,
So,
who cares? They're all dying anyways. So you know
Yeah.
what? We get to call it now. Like,
yeah, and the reason why it's tangentially related to TV and the network sucking. Well, the next crop of movies are all based on old TV shows. So the studios wanted to make film versions of their TV shows, and all of them failed. So great for us, I guess. But it starts off on May 7th with The Avengers from 1998. Then we're going into The Mod Squad from 1999. Then Miami Vice from 2006. Get Smart from 2008, and then capping off with the Will Ferrell classic, Land of the Lost from 2009.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
definitely a movie that exists.
Yes. But I like that we're doing a little bit of a 10-year history lesson on TV, theatrical TV reboots. So
I really like it too because apart from it all being like movies based on TV shows, that's actually a pretty wide like range of like genres, different types of movies, and even like a nice mix of movies I've seen and movies I haven't.
Yes.
I haven't seen all those, so I like that there's some in there, that'll be first time watches for me. I like that some of them are comedies, some of them are actions, some of them are like more dramatic. So yeah, I think this is gonna be a fun one.
yeah, it'll be fun. Follow along at F2FPod. That's at F2, the number 2 FPod on all the socials. So like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. Throw us a star rating if you so choose. And just join the tribe and hit that subscribe. And we're going into summer sweeps. Should be fun.
Groovy.